This is said to be a really tough week coming up for the Prime Minister. Economic figures which may confirm a recession and a possible rise in inflation, followed by two by-elections in safe Tory seats. I say safe in inverted commas because Labour will probably take both of them. At least the Commons isn't sitting, so there's no Prime Minister's questions to worry about, but really, the week from hell. Except I'm not entirely sure, because at the end of such a week, the anti-Sunak plotters in the Tory party, who have been burbling and muttering in the shadows for so long, will surely have to strike and try and take him out. Or bottle it. This feels like Sunak's week of maximum danger. On past form, I suspect the rebel army is all wind and wastewater, eager to wound but too afraid to kill. Does the exiled hard right have a candidate? Do they have a plan? And by plan, by the way, I mean more than just another opinion poll and a huffy-puffy article in the Daily Telegraph. And if there is no big move against the Prime Minister, then we can take it more or less as read that he will lead the Tories into the next election. There will be more crises, no doubt, in May, after the local elections, and possibly at other points as well. But if he seems safe on Saturday, he may well be safe until November, because the whole notion of changing leader yet again before the general election, time-consuming, politically costly, also eventually runs out of time. Meanwhile, his great rival Keir Starmer is having a bit of a bloody week as well. His candidate, at a third by-election in Rochdale coming at the end of the month, said something about Gaza which is both mad as cheese and also anti-Semitic, that Israel had known about the October the 7th massacre planned by Hamas, but deliberately allowed it to go ahead to give the green light to invade Gaza. What Azhar Ali said was worse than things which have caused Labour MPs to be suspended from the party in the past, but it is too late to actually withdraw him as the Labour candidate, and so Starmer had a choice. Either rather shamefacedly accept an apology and plough on, or announce now that Ali would not be allowed to take the Labour whip and effectively, in campaigning terms, cut him loose, withdrawing from the Rochdale contest. That might allow the viciously anti-Starmer self-publicist George Galloway to win the contest, but it would reassure all of those people worried about Labour anti-Semitism that the party really had changed. Anyway, he's decided on the first of these, so I think undoing a lot of the goodwill he had painfully accumulated among Jewish groups. A hard choice, but is it the right choice? I'll be talking about that a little later, and I would really welcome your views, so perhaps you could text me on 84850. But first, let's turn to LBC's political editor, Natasha Clark. Natasha, I said right at the top that this was looking like one of the worst weeks for Rishi Sunak so far. Do you agree?
I agree on some parts, yes. I think economically it's going to be a very difficult week for the Prime Minister. We've got inflation statistics out which are expected to show a small uptick in inflation. Obviously, Rishi Sunak's pledge was to keep that down and to cut that. That will be a bit of a blow for him, especially as the government are hosting a business council on Wednesday as well. So it's going to be a pretty awkward moment for business, as well as the economic figures. And we're expected, and the Chancellor, I think, expects as well that we're going to have to enter a technical recession. And that is not a good thing.
We all say technical recession, but a technical recession is a recession.
It is still a recession, exactly, and it still doesn't look fantastic for the former Chancellor, now Prime Minister, to be residing over that. And we've got all this, of course, those by-elections will take place on Thursday as well. And like you say, the expectation is that the Conservatives will lose both of those. The management from the party has been much better than it was ahead of the last set of by-election results. Now, obviously, that's what they should be doing. The Conservatives should be saying, of course, we're going to lose both.
Depressing all our expectations.
Exactly. But I think whether that is true or not, there are some people that I think are a little bit more hopeful about Kingswood. I don't think CCHQ have spent very much time or money on either of these two by-elections. I don't think they've been sending ministers down at all. But the other hand is Peter Bone, obviously the partner of Helen Harrison, who's the candidate in the Wellingborough by-election, will know that seat very well, and he will know where to target those Conservative voters. So that also could have a slight uptick in those results. But the Prime Minister, obviously, it's recess, but he will be out and about on Friday, I'm told as well. So that shows maybe a slight air of confidence.
He's always out and about. The other part of what I was saying, of course, is about this endless Tory plot bubbling away at the sidelines of Westminster politics. And we occasionally see an article here, an eruption there. But there doesn't seem to me to be any kind of plan. What do we actually know about the plot?
So this plot, I think, probably no more than around a dozen Conservative MPs involved in actively and trying to undermine the Prime Minister. Those were the 11, they're calling them. Obviously, those people that voted against Rishi Sunak's Rwanda plan as well, and various other former special advisors that previously worked in government in a number of forms involved in that. Obviously, you've had those polls that you mentioned there in the Daily Telegraph. Again, we don't know where those are funded from at the moment. We know that there is being some investigation into them as well, which I'm sure our guests will speak about this evening. But yes, there is not a lot we know about them. We know there are some reportedly shifty shadows in the Conservative Party that are taking this action. But what we have been knowing so far is that they've been quite quiet the past couple of days, and they have been saying, look to the by-elections, that's the next big thing. But I know that many Conservative MPs have been put off by the reaction to Simon Clarke. When he went over the top, he didn't get a lot of support from anybody else calling for the Prime Minister to go. But yes, I think the general narrative from the Conservatives is they can get through this hell week. They are quite confident. They expected this week to come, and they will be fighting fit, hopefully, they think, at the end of this. I can't see how we get to the end of the week with the Prime Minister coming up with this leadership challenge that we've been talking about.
Despite those shifty shadows, you just about got away with that one, Natasha. Thank you very much indeed. Now, so much to talk about. Let me turn first to Sir Craig Oliver, who's former Director of Politics and Communications in Downing Street under David Cameron and host of the global podcast Desperately Seeking Wisdom, which is, of course, Craig, what we're about on this programme all the time. So you're sitting in Downing Street. Let's imagine you're sitting in Downing Street with Rishi Sunak and you're looking at this week ahead. There's nothing you can do about the economic statistics. You can't affect those. But this expectation management about the by-elections that Natasha was talking about, that is clearly the right thing to do, isn't it?
Well, I was thinking exactly that about expectation management, but I do think there is something that you can do about the economic news, and that is lead people to believe that it's going to be bad and hope that it's not going to be quite so bad. And I think that that's what Number 10 is basically thinking at the moment, is if we can get to the end of the week and one of these three things isn't as bad as we predicted it would be, then we can say, look, things are looking up and it's all okay. I have to say that is from a very grim position. And the one thing that I would be particularly worried about if I was Rishi Sunak is the inflation numbers. That's the thing that's really hurting people at the moment. Food inflation is currently around about 8%, so double what the current base rate of inflation is. It's really hurting people, and I think that is a real worry for them.
And, of course, it's not just the very small change in the inflation number. It's what that does to the Bank of England's decision to cut or not to cut interest rates. So that's going to affect the economic feeling much later in the year as well.
Yeah, it's bad news on all fronts. That Rishi Sunak is obviously hoping that the Bank of England will have significant interest rates cuts before the next election, put more money in more people's pockets and making them feel perhaps a little bit better. I also think he's hoping that he can cheer up his own backbenchers and people who are really, really grumpy with him at the moment, and if the economic news is bad. So on all fronts, the economic news is not great for him, and he'll be deeply worried about that.
If I can imagine you back in your Number 10 bunker and you're sticking your periscope up and looking around and you're trying to observe these plotters, Natasha was pretty withering about their numbers and their ability to actually have anything in the locker to take out and attack Sunak with in due course. Do you rather agree with that, or do you think this is a serious assault?
No, I don't think it is that serious at all. And I think it's serious in the sense that it keeps wounding and it's sort of more and more cuts to the Prime Minister, and that's a problem. But not serious in the sense that it's actually going to take him out. I do think that, he will be worried if the Reform vote and the Conservative vote adds up to more than whoever wins the by-election, if that makes sense. If you basically have a net vote between Reform and the Conservative Party that would been enough to form a majority, that will embolden people on the right of the party to say, look, we've got to do more to cringe towards the Reform people. We've got to do more to win them back and on board. And I think that personally would be precisely the wrong strategy. But I suspect if that is the case, there will be even more pressure on him to get even more right-wing.
And, we were saying in the studio just now that this is really put up or shut up time for the plotters. But in a sense, it's the moment of truth for Reform UK as well, because they have poured money and effort into the Wellingborough by-election. And if they fail to get a good result there, then perhaps a little bit of the oxygen goes out of that balloon as well.
Yeah, I think if they're not doing well, that's a bit of a problem for them. I do suspect we may still be talking to each other about this after the local elections, Andrew. So you're right about put up or shut up. The more time that passes, the less likely it becomes. But if the local elections are absolutely devastating, of course, people can still say, look, this is our only hope. So we've still got to get through May, I think.
That's very, very well put. Sir Craig, thank you very much indeed to that. Sir Craig, host of the Desperately Seeking Wisdom Global podcast, the new series of which is out now. Now, Lord Robert Hayward is Conservative peer and a polling expert. You probably know more about Tory polling than any man alive, Robert, so it's very good to have you here. Let me start by the depth of the trouble that the Prime Minister is in. We have a new poll out tonight from Redford Wilson showing 21% Tory number, which is, I think, the lowest under Rishi Sunak and not very far off the lowest under Liz Truss as well. That is pretty grim.
It is grim, and there's no question that the polls have been grim for a number of months. They've been flatlining in one form or another. And what I think has depressed the body of the Conservative MPs and the Conservative Party at large is the fact that it has flatlined, that the poll numbers have broadly flatlined. They've varied up or down each week, but broadly they're in a fairly similar position.
We've seen that big change of policy on the £28 billion from the Labour Party this week. Do you think that's going to be reflected in the polling anytime soon?
It takes a while for any event to really feed through into an opinion poll. I think it's a Labour policy which many people didn't know they had, but they know that they've registered that they've actually changed their mind on it. But I think the real problem for the Labour Party is not in what one would regard as the Conservative seats. The demographic that really cares about climate change and therefore the 28 billion is younger voters. And in cities where there are large university populations, Labour MPs are going to have real problems, whether that's Bristol, Brighton, Sheffield, Lancaster. Those are the sorts of places where Labour MPs are going to be under pressure.
And thinking about that number in particular, we don't really know at this stage whether what Keir Starmer did on this is going to be a net benefit or a net disbenefit from him. How long before that starts to show up in polling, do you think?
I don't it's one of a number of things, and you'll have to look into the detail to see whether it's shown up amongst that key younger demographic. It won't show up amongst the 50s and 60-year-olds in general. They're much more interested in the cost of living, in immigration, NHS and the like. So each issue matters to different demographics in one form or another.
Robert, listening to you there, I'm hearing that kind of Bristolian burr coming through your voice very much. And of course, you were the MP back when for Kingswood, one of the two seats coming up at the end of this week. What is your instinct about it? And just tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Well, I think given the swing that the Conservatives have had against them in the last few by-elections, places like Tamworth, Mid-Bedfordshire, etc., then yes, the Conservatives would expect to lose both those seats on Thursday. So it's Labour's. If Labour don't take both of them, it will be embarrassing for them.
That's the story, as it were.
Absolutely. So it's a seat I feel completely at home. I've been down there this weekend, hence this probably somewhat strengthened burr. I was out in a part of the area that I didn't actually represent because the boundaries have changed.
And what did it feel like when you were down there?
I think it confirmed what we saw in the other by-elections, which is twofold. One is the Conservatives haven't overcome the problems of the 20 to 2022 period. People are critical of that. But more importantly, and this is what worries me as a Democrat, is that people are just turned off politics. I think the turnout in the by-elections, and I fear in the general election, will be low because people are not, in the way that they were in 96, 97, where they were really gung-ho for Blair and Labour. They're not in that same frame of mind for any political party.
Do you think they have given up in the ability of the British state to achieve change of any kind?
They being the voters?
Yes,
I think that is the sense, because if you look at the details of the polls, actually people perceive Labour as a no-change party at the moment, and that's worrying for politics in general.